Hello everybody and welcome back to another exciting edition of Boyographic, the show in which I, Matt the Gameboy, talk you through the highs and lows of the Gameboy library, one card at a time. This week we will be looking at an unlikely sequel. It's BC Kid 2. You know why I love retro gaming? Other than fulfilling some strange hunter-gatherer instinct that sees me rooting around flea markets and thrift stores, just like early man did in the times before the internet. It's because despite how long I've played video games and how deep I feel my knowledge of them goes, I always manage to find new, interesting titles. With TurboGrafx 16 never really getting into the European console wars, before I got my hands on the first BC Kid title for Game Boy, I'd never really played a Bonk game. That's why, despite me already owning BC Kid 2, or Bonk's Revenge as it's known stateside, I let a little bit of dust settle before somersaulting headfirst into the second game. But I couldn't take it anymore, dear viewers. I needed to know if the first game's cheerful tunes, quirky style and tight gameplay were a fluke, or the hallmarks of a series that had completely passed me by. So, from the game's title, I know what you're thinking. This game is just going to be a Game Boy port of a TurboGrafx game with a few tweaks here and there, just like the Game Boy Bonk's Adventure. Well, there are definitely some similarities between the Game Boy and TurboGrafx titles. Things aren't that simple this time around. The biggest link is the game's stories, namely King Drool stealing half the moon, leaving the titular caveman no choice but to get it back. Aside from that, the only real ties between the Bonk's Revenge titles are the characters, a few enemies, and the fact it's a follow-up game to one called Bonk's Adventure. So what are the big differences between the Bonks? Well, while Bonk's Adventure is more of the same, BC Kid 2 actually mixes a few things up. For instance, Bonk doesn't simply become a more powerful version of himself after eating meat anymore, but offers the player three interesting forms to choose from. The first is Master Bonk, a superhero version of the Cave Crusader with pointy ears and a cape, allowing him to run faster and jump higher. Hungry Bonk almost looks like Venom from Spider-Man, and you guessed it, can open his mouth wide and eat enemies in one shot. Finally, there's Stealth Bonk, who, in the Western releases, is dressed as a thief with a ball and chain for good measure. As you progress through the game world, you'll see a lot of locked doors around the levels. Stealth Bonk can enter these domains and steal meat to switch up power-ups, smiley bonuses that grant an extra life for 100 collected, and sometimes even be sent to jail and lose half of those dishonourably earned smileys. The risk-reward factor of this power is actually quite a draw, as the odds are pretty much 50-50 in my experience. Strangely though, the classic-looking thief sprite, as I've mentioned, is only in the Western releases of the title. As you see, in the original Japanese release of this game, Bonk looked slightly different and was changed to avoid a blackface comparison in the rest of the world. Yikes. Dotted around the stages, between collecting meat, smiley faces and invincibility icons, are occasionally magic tulips, which, when touched, instigate a mini-game for extra lives. It's you against Mecha Bonk, a sprite that in no way, shape or form looks anything like Robocop, in what can only be described as a bonk-off. It's a pretty simple concept, a best of three head-butting contest to see who can knock the other player off the edge of the arena. While the extra lives here can really come in handy, with unlimited continues there's never really any need to worry about one-ups until the final stage. But be warned, all of these bonus rounds, which if you pick up every tulip means one per stage, will mean you face off against RoboBonk again and again and again. Always the same opponent on the same arenas for the same thing. It's such a shame that it becomes so monotonous so fast. As if there wasn't so much luck involved, it could have made an interesting segment of the game. Losing in this bonus round often happens not through lack of skill, but because of time running out, which will see you go back to the real game as an injured Bonk, a mummy that takes twice as much damage as the regular version, which while it is a pain in the ass, does again emphasise this risk-reward theme that seems to run through the game. But tedious minigames aside, you'd be happy to know that Mecha Bonk isn't the only pop culture icon in this title. As well, BC Kid 2 is brimming with references to popular properties. As all of the game's bosses, bar Drool, are new on this portable title, the game's developers Red Company Corporation were able to slip in some not-so-subtle references to popular culture, including Darth Vader, a horned Ninja Turtle, and a Xenomorph. Of course, there are more traditional bosses in BC Kid 2, as well as the usual endgame boss rush before final confrontation with King Drool. They all play nicely and have some interesting mechanics, but other than their looks, the bosses are nothing to rave about. The levels the bosses inhabit, however, are actually worth the song and dance. Most new stages are a big leap away from traditional Bonk games, sometimes even stepping into futuristic Zonk territory. While this may seem sacrilegious to some, it keeps the game feeling fresh and inspired, rather than distracting the player. Dotted around these stages are an impressive variety of enemies to bludgeon with your brutal bonds, and there's also some nice new additions in how you traverse the world. As in previous Bonk titles, Bonk can bite down on walls and vines to climb up them, but now he can also do this to duck under crevices. It's a great idea, but unfortunately can be pretty tricky to control. It wouldn't usually be an issue, but there are parts between bosses in the later game boss rush where you really need to switch from biting a ceiling to biting a floor, and this can be surprisingly tedious for such a simple mechanic. Fortunately, you don't have to do it this way too often, so it's more a mark on Bonk's good name rather than the slap in the face it could have been. Other than this, the only real complaint I've heard about BC Kid 2 is that the music isn't that great, which is true to a certain extent. Gone are the great melodies from the first Game Boy outing, but the music in this portable offering isn't terrible by any means. Sure, it's a little chirpy in places, but as Game Boy scores go, it's definitely passable. So, all in all, BC Kid has inspired me not only to check out the real Bonk games in their natural habitat on the PC Engine, but has lit a flame of curiosity in me to see what else the console has to offer. As a Game Boy game though, BC Kid 2 looks and plays great, creating a perfect balance with its difficulty and its length. Like any good portable game of this size should, it also has a password system you can pick up where you left off. Short of passable music and an outrageous prices this game is starting to go for, be sure to let nothing stand in your way of getting your Bonk on. And that brings us to the end of another Boyographic, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you've enjoyed. If you have, please subscribe and tell others you think may enjoy the channel to do so, as that's how it gets around. You can also check out some other Boyographic videos where I look at the highs and lows of the Game Boy library one card at a time. You can also check out some Boy Curious videos where I look at bootleggers and oddities, as well as some All the Glory titles where I play through a game cutting out all of the deaths, leaving you with none of the faff and all of the glory. Until next time, Game Boys and Girls, you can find me on Twitter at GameBoyle and also on Facebook and Instagram at the same place. Until then, game on.